Hi, Andy.
Hey.
Um, I'm a big fan of asking you questions because of the interesting, deep answers I get. So I have a question for you.
Mhm.
Why are you a proponent of taking labels off of things?
Oh, that's a that's a really interesting question. I think it has a little bit to do with bias
Okay.
because when I say I want to talk to you about safety, I know what I mean. When somebody says or the recipient goes through all of their experiences of the past in safety and goes, "Oh yeah, great," or "Uh-oh." And I think the other thing is when it comes to, we'll talk about conversations on the front line, if you like. When you think about the point at which we deliver to our clients, our customers, whatever products or services it is, HR have trained you, you've had finance training, safety guys have come and done stuff with you, you've got procurement things to think about, and people have stuck you on an emotional intelligence course and how to ask better questions. You've got all of these things running around in your head. But you know what your challenges are, right? And if I try and put a label on and everybody else puts a label on, then you've got a front line that's trying to balance, I've got to do the job, but I've got all of these things to think about as well. So if I go to the front line and say, what's it like to be you here? What challenges do you face? What adaptations do you have to make? And what are you struggling with? They'll just tell me what their story is. And sometimes it's a safety thing, and sometimes it's a quality thing, and sometimes it's a finance thing. But whatever challenges they have, they're just looking at what they're facing. If I say, talk to me about safety, then I've just narrowed that in. And, you know, does that make sense?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The labels are creating meaning, and that meaning is all over the place for everyone. Potentially. I totally get that. So here's what I want to talk about today. We at HP at H formerly known as HPRCT, we changed the name of the conference to Community of Human and Organizational Learning. Now,
Oh,
even though we were Community of Human and Organizational Learning, we asked people to submit under a label of an approach. So, is your presentation HRO? Is it RCA? This year we tried something new, which is, and I was involved in the conversation, so I feel responsible of whether it was a learning decision is what it'll be. But we decide, what if we sort of create three buckets for the presentation is under the sort captured, it's about people, it's about processes, or about profitability. What do you think about that decision? What's good, bad, and different?
no, I think it's good. No, I think it is good. I think the whole, safety profession is trying to say, let's shake off a reputation because we have a reputation that sometimes isn't a great one. And when we go to conferences, sometimes we reinforce the reputation by talking about rules and tools. So if we can move away from rules and tools and sound more like the board, right? How are our people doing? How are we motivating? How are we creating the conditions for them to thrive? If you can't have a conversation at the board about, what is the return on investment of safety? And you can't just say, well, do you know what the cost of having an accident is? Right? It doesn't wash, right? You can't go in and say, well, we're going to be less bad, right? We're going to find bad things and we're going to be less bad. So no, no, what? Tell me, have a business conversation with me about why we're going to be a better version of ourselves. Have a business conversation with me about if I do this with you now, how are we a better company? And there's a huge ROI in trust. There's a huge ROI in understanding that safety is an outcome of how you run the business. So, what is the process that we go through to make the outcomes happen? And if you can focus on that, right, not the outcomes and working our way backwards. So I think people, we struggle with engagement. Why? Leadership, conversations, employee engagement, so on. Why? What's the process that we're going to go through to get people on board, to get them engaged, to contribute in a positive way? And what's the ROI? And how do we support the overall business objectives? Because if you're thriving and successful, that's what the board want to hear about, right? So that's
Hmm.
my take.
What about the process and the profitability? So you're what I hear you saying is we've now just shifted into some buckets that will raise the eyebrows and create meaning for the board. So even though there's still labels because we have to have some, we picked ones that are interesting, that everyone can gather around versus something that's um, foreign or may even feel threatening.
Yeah. But, I think great questions are a superpower, right? You ask questions to promote critical thinking and problem solving. So if you've got quite often people listen to the question and figure out the one that they would rather you asked and then come up with the answer that they want to give, right? But I think your whole aim there on, well, let's talk about profitability. Oh, okay. How is it that I can show that this is desirable for an organization, right? When you talk about process, you're not asking people for another tool, right? Everybody does start of work meetings, right? Everybody does observation pros, everybody does audits. But if you look at it from well, as I would do, what's the process by which we create better outcomes, then challenge that back. It needs to be more than a tools conversation. And that when I hear process, I hear more than tools. I hear collaboration. I hear connection. I hear contribution, because that's the process that we need to go through to create outcomes that are beneficial or better. So
So,
make
so
sense?
the buckets, okay, the three categories are really asking a question of the presenter that they have to self-reflect and say, okay, I better be contributing to these somehow to these essential elements of the business and how do I do that with what I'm going to bring to the conference. And interestingly, what do you think about this? We have less I meant to get the numbers this morning, but the process is much higher category than the people or the profitability.
Surprise. Welcome to the safety profession. Yeah, no, I think, if CHO at Learning is trying to push the profession in a different direction, it needs to create different thought processes. If I can change the way you think, then I can change the way you behave. So, year one, we're trying something different, see what happens, and then build momentum on it. I think the other thing for me with previous conferences, there are a huge number of really, really interesting people that come and speak, right? These people that have achieved phenomenal success and are willing to come and share knowledge and learning and interact with people. That's great. But when you've got four, five, 10 people talking about what they want to talk about in a given day, you're completely overloaded. You do workshops on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you're in, you know, speeches, you've got workshops on the Friday. It's hard. So I think if you narrow that down and say, okay, we're gonna look at the profit bucket, then you've got a range of tools underneath a theme, a range of topics under a theme, a range of things that people have applied and worked for under a theme. And then you can start and kind of focus out. So, or focus in, should I say. So instead of having this, 50 different opportunities to learn from somebody in an hour, you're starting to create themes that are aligned with go back and add value to your organization, because relationships are the foundation of all success. We can do nothing in isolation. And safety professionals are facing burnout and frustration because we're trying to connect with people. So how do we do that, right? What's the process of value creation in the organization? Because we want to know that. how is it that we're all knocking on the door of the C-suite trying to figure out, you know, please see me as a value add? Well, let's look at the profit streams and see what comes out of that because we're dying to have a seat at the table that gives us a bigger slice of time, trouble, effort, investment, resource, whatever you want to call it. So I think it's a good thing.
Okay, this is exciting because now it's these labels, even though we're the new labels, okay, more broader labels are actually now going to be meaningful to the board. They're asking a question of the presenter, but it's also organizing thematically for the participants.
No, absolutely. I
So,
thought it's the whole point behind it, right?
well, we knew we knew that we needed to try something new and that we were what this is interesting because on one hand we value the strength of the conference is that we bring the diverse
Yep.
perspectives together and we value each other. So we don't want to lose that, but yet we felt like that wasn't the right. We knew there's distinctions, but that wasn't the right distinction. We're like, what's a better way to organize our thinking? So it sounds
Yeah.
like we have stepped it up. Um, I always like to be cautious of I want to be confident, but I always seek other perspectives and I knew you would have an interesting perspective on this. And then maybe we can learn just from, wow, we need to let's why aren't we talking about people more? Look how we might stumble over profitability. Let's let's fill in these gaps. And
Yeah. The whole, it's like I've done the education. Okay, so I an education works like this. You show up and you get the lesson, right? And then you get the test, and the test is based on the lesson. So you've already been given some knowledge. Your test is from the professional institute or whatever that says, did you pay attention in class? And then you get the result. Okay, so we're okay trying something new, got some new themes. So we've jumped out the airplane. Now we're going to build the parachute on the way down because experience, which is really what you've got in the room, experience is we're going to try something out. Okay, this is the test, and then we're going to get a result, and then we're going to figure out what we just learned because the lesson comes at the end of experience. So I think what we're trying to do now is something different. But as long as we have conferences that tell people what they got taught at safety school, then all we're doing is talking to an echo chamber and making people feel very comfortable that it resonates with them because they identify with the rules and tools approach. So you push them in a different direction and say, "Oh, you got to show up to the business, and the ethical and moral arguments cannot be disputed. But we're in business to create value. We're in business to be a better version of ourselves. And we need to get you to learn a different skill set because what CHOL learning, what co-learning and so on are trying to do is bring experience to the room where we say it needs to be like this in an organization because just because you've got a book smart doesn't mean you know how to apply this to people and engage and collaborate. Doesn't mean that you've got a process because you've got a theory. So what's the process for value creation? And it doesn't mean that you know how to talk to business leaders to say, what's the benefit in this for you? And they're looking at this about value creation because leaders are held accountable, shareholders or whoever it is, for creating a thriving business. How are you part of that? And it has to be efficiency. It has to be effectiveness because we can't stand alone in a moral argument anymore.
so you just added the fourth dimension, how these new buckets actually ask a question of the conference. Who are you going to be as a conference? Are you going to become more relevant through the lens of the conference? So that's the board, the presenters, the participants, and now the conference itself. Is it going to grow and push people to a new space? Offer the opportunity. We don't want to push anyone, but offer like a green pasture of like, let's move to this, let's move to this new place. So this is far richer than I even expected. It's a great constructive analysis of what we did. And I'm excited to also ask participants and presenters what happened, what surprised them when we created this new way of organizing our presentations. So,
So here's something when you're interacting with people, right? Um, Change, if you can't see the benefit, is hard. Change when you can see the benefit. Okay, I'm good with that. So the closer you are to the target audience on their comfort zone, maybe polishing things like that, people will resonate and identify with subjects that they resonate and identify with, and then it's a little bit of polish, and you go back to business and say, "Ha, I was right. Here's a little bit of polish." You got to be really careful with that. So when you're asking participants, was there anything that you felt frustrated at? Frustration is a really good indication that your brain is resisting learning a new habit.
hmm,
Right? So it's like, no, 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 it doesn't quite fit well. Really? For what reason? So really examine the reason and source of that, the frustration or the confusion or something, and understand that co-learning puts somebody in front of you because they've got something to say. If you don't like it and it feels uncomfortable, well, you're on the path to learning something, right? So don't reject because it's uncomfortable. Embrace it and see where's this path going. And I urge whoever's presenting, talk about results
hmm,
because if you've got results out of it. Not, abstract theory, everybody's like, oh, that's quite interesting. If your presenters are focused on results, then they can show the benefit. And then when people are frustrated, they're like, well, okay, I get frustrated because I'm not quite sure where you came from or where you got, but I can see the result of that. So therefore, I'm going to dive into the source of frustration and I got something to figure out here.
yeah. If you think about it, of the community of human and organizational learning, if we're about learning, we all need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable about of learning. So maybe that's something Charles needs to talk about, like getting our mindset up is like, you know what? It's okay if you get uncomfortable. That's a good sign. You're not listening to what you already knew. You're being challenged, and this is where the growth will come from. So that could be a really interesting tidbit to work with.
The bit in the people bucket, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The people bucket. I'm also interested in seeing, I'm in the people bucket. Um, who else is in the people bucket, and how can we learn from each other and strengthen, you know, what we can offer to the world through.
I think right, and you know, I I've been given opportunities that I would say I'd taken, right? But it's other people made me. Other people's perspective made me. If I hung about with people that are the same as me, I would never have learned anything. Stay in the same village, stay in the same town, drink in the same pub, play the same games, listen to the same music, right? You don't learn anything. So, in the 90s, I found myself in 5 different European countries inside of, weeks. And and I figured out that different perspectives and different backgrounds have different ways of solving problems, have different language and ways of talking to each other and collaborating, and some are a bit more direct than others. If you're in the Netherlands, you're straight talking guys, right? If you're in France, it's more about relationships, and you talk for half an hour before you actually get into a proper conversation about why we were here. But though the whole point of co-learning, bringing people from so many diverse backgrounds, so many different industries, is so that you get an opportunity to hear how somebody else had a different approach. And the more you get comfortable with different approaches, the easier it becomes to get comfortable with different approaches,
Mhm.
right? And I think the other thing, when you put it into buckets, I've worked in so many different industries. Nuclear. I'm sorry for singling them out, but when you show up and they're like, "Oh, you're from oil and gas. You're different." Okay, so are you looking for people engagement for leadership? Are you looking for a process by which to create value? Are your board interested in ROI? Well, yeah. Okay, so we're the same then. Right? So so I think again going back to those themes, a philosophy hop is applicable no matter what industry that you're in, right? It's individuals are individual performance is influenced by organizational processes and values. Values are common: trust, respect, dignity. So I think the themes that you've picked out help us see what's the same. And
Mm.
when you see what's the same, it's a lot easier to build the learning and stop a little bit of the Stone Age 1.0 programming that says, not one of us, not one of us. And it shuts down learning, right? So I think I keep saying the word themes because we talked about taking labels off earlier on. So let's go with themes.